Today's subject is towards a universal religion. This topic, this phrase has become very common these days. If you look at the history of philosophy and religion, you find that there is a trend towards the more holistic, universal, and more humanistic ideas in modern times. Of course, here we are confining ourselves to the universal or universalistic tendencies and trends in religious thoughts. The term universal religion was popularized during the latter half of 19th century. The idea that religion should have a universal dimension became very popular among the early Unitarians in America. As a term, it refers to religious, theological, and philosophical concepts with universal application or applicability. And sometimes it is used to identify particular doctrines considering all people in their formation. In Christianity, in Buddhism, and also in Hinduism, these trends existed even in the early times. For example, in Christian tradition, universal reconciliation is a doctrine that all sinful and alienated human souls, because of divine love and mercy, will ultimately be reconciled to God. So, at the end of our existence, we will get back to the kingdom of God if we accept Jesus as the Savior. Of course, it is a conditioned doctrine in Christian tradition. To that extent, its universalism is also somewhat modified. I mean, those who take refuge in Jesus, those who accept Him as the Savior, the one who purges the sinners of all their sins, will be reconciled to the kingdom of God, from which they fell as the inheritors of the original sin, dating back from the time of Adam and Eve. In modern times, a denominational deviation took place in Christianity. Sometimes it is called Unitarian Universalism, which became popular even before Swami Vivekananda came to America, even before the Parliament of Religions. So Unitarian Universalism believes that religion is a universal human quality, emphasizing the universal principles of most religions and accepting other religions in an inclusive manner, believing in a universal reconciliation between humanity and the divine. Now, this is altogether a deviation from the accepted dogmatic doctrine of Christianity, which took deep roots right from the time of St. Augustine onwards. So you find there's a trend towards universalism in all the established organized religions. But again, as I said earlier, these universal tendencies were conditioned by certain aspects. And though the Unitarians stressed the universalism of the divine, the spiritual, still it did not take deep roots, because gradually it came to be absorbed in the mainstream church, as it happened in the beginning of 20th century. Now, in modern times, in Hindu tradition, universalized or universalistic interpretation of Hinduism is often called Neo-Vedanta or the modern Vedantic interpretation, which originally started with the coming of Swami Vivekananda in America in 1893. So it's called, sometimes called it is Neo-Hinduism. It's a modern interpretation of Hinduism which in a way developed in response to Western colonialism and Orientalism. And it tries to present Hinduism in a homogenized ideal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, universal tendencies or universalist tendencies exist in all religious traditions. Because in all religious traditions, you find two main streams. The primary, the fundamental, the spiritual, the eternal, the timeless, and the secondary, the changing ideas and doctrines. In Vedantic tradition, the former is sometimes called the teachings of the Shrutis. Shruti means Vedas. The definition is Sruyate Dharma Anayayidis Brahmadhinam Paramatmanam Labhantaidi Veda. Just the interpretation is this. Shruti can be interpreted in two different ways. In one way, it could be interpreted as something which teaches you the fundamental ideals and disciplines of life in this world. And going beyond that, the latter interpretation definition given by Shankaracharya in his Bhashya and commentary on Sanasujatiya, which is Brahmadhinam Paramatmanam Labhanta Iti Veda. So Veda is Shruti. So Shruti or Veda is something which teaches you certain fundamental, universal, eternal, everlasting, spiritual principles and ideals, which are harmonizing, synthesizing, humanizing, unifying, and elevating for the whole human race, not only for a particular age or for people living in a particular nation or geographical area, or for people born to a particular cultural tradition, but for all humanity of all ages, all times. This is the essence of the universalism in Vedantic tradition. So in that sense, it goes beyond the limitations of what we normally understand by the term religion. So in modern times, modern interpreters of universal religion, including Vivekananda, Dr. Radhakrishnan, and others, I say it is the religion of religions, the religion of religions with different faith systems, different organized religious traditions originated in different cultural, geographical traditions. The true religion is a universal spirituality which goes beyond the confines of what we normally understand by the term organized religion. That was what Vivekananda brought to Western world. And that is sometimes called Neo-Vedanta or Neo-Hinduism. Now, I mentioned earlier that in all religious traditions, these universalist, broad-minded ideas can be found. You find any religion you take, ideas and ideals which teach us look upon the entire humanity as one spiritual family, as one spiritual fraternity. So, an ideal which teaches us to be compassionate, to accept other faith systems, not only faith systems, even political ideas, sociological ideas. There could be diversity and plurality. But Diversity or plurality can be looked upon from two different angles. If you look upon diversity as an exclusive unit, then every diverse faith system or political or social ideology is an island within itself. It is isolated. Now, universalism teaches us to accept these diverse ideas and at the same time to see a unifying thread, a unifying principle behind this diversity. So diversity can be approached from two different angles. From the angle of exclusivism, if you take that angle, you accept every path as different from every other path. You look upon every ideology, every doctrine, or every faith system as distinct and different from every other faith system. But still you accept it. Well, diversity is something to be celebrated. It is not something to be condemned. This is all right. But universalism, as taught by Vedantic teachers, goes a step beyond. It teaches you to look upon diversity as something to be accepted, not only tolerated, but to be accepted, to be appreciated, to be celebrated. But not on the principle, well, diversity is a matter of experience in this relative world. Not based on that ideal, but rather behind the diverse, behind the many, behind the many and behind the diverse faith systems, there is one unifying principle. And that is what Swami Vivekananda said, I want to take the humanity to a level where neither the Gita, nor the Bible, nor the Quran exists, but where all these are reconciled. It's something very interesting. Swami Vivekananda said, he wants to take humanity beyond the doctrinal, beyond the dogmatic religious traditions. But at the same time, that's an outlook which appreciates, which accommodates all dogmas, all doctrines, so long as they are not in conflict with the idea of universal humanism. So every religion is an equally valid path leading to the same goal. I have to point out again and again, as I did on many earlier occasions, though this universal religion as a concept, as we understand today, was popularized by Swami Vivekananda, we have to remember the genesis of all these ideas could be found in the teachings of the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, in the commentaries of great interpreters like Shankaracharya, and also in the teachings of Jesus Christ like Beatitudes, in the teachings of Buddha, the Eight Noble Paths, the Dhammapada. In all these works, you can find the genesis, the essence of these universal spiritual ideas. As a concept, it became popular during our times. Now, this is one point. Now, what stands in our way of appreciating this reality? Because if you look at the history of humanity, you find there have been more bloodsheds, more wars, more battles, bloodier battles than battles fought in modern times, in the name of religion and on behalf of God. The atheists and agnostics never fought wars on behalf of atheism and agnosticism. But religious people fought wars in the name of God and on behalf of religion. Now, why this contradiction? If the original teachings of the great spiritual leaders of the world contained the highly unifying, humanizing ideas, then why should there be conflicts in the name of the same religion? The answer, according to modern historians, is this. Certain man-made structures, institutionalized customs and rituals, organized practices, which are again built upon man-made structures, take humanity away from these fundamental spiritual ideas. This has happened in all religious traditions. So we read about the massacres in the name of religion, the crusade, the persecutions, the inquisitions, the casteism, and so many social injustices practiced in the name of religion. So these man-made structures, which are sometimes supported by the priestcraft, by dogmas, by certain rigid theological traditions, take a deviation and they give a bad name to God and also to religion. So that's why in the last century, in the 20th century, there were two attempts to substitute religion with a kind of brutalized worship of collective manpower. One was nationalism, the other was communism. The Nazism and fascism were movements which almost replaced religion. They themselves became religious dogmas, some kind of religious dogmas, minus God. So atrocities and violence were committed in the name of these ultra-nationalistic, ultra-socialistic ideas. This fascism and Nazism were ultra-nationalistic attempts to substitute God and religion with something much worse, which gave us the longest and the most violent world war humanity has seen in its history. And the second attempt was communism, which also was an equally diabolic attempt to substitute religion and God and place a religion which is much worse than any kind of theistic religious traditions, because it didn't have faith in a transcendental authority of morality. But both failed. These were two attempts made in the 20th century. In the 19th century, there have been attempts. Apart from nationalism, there was an attempt to go back to paganism. And one important attempt that was made in 18th century and also 19th century was an attempt to revive humanism as a substitute for religious tradition. So whenever mankind moves away from the spiritual and the universal teachings of religious traditions, there will be attempts to replace religion with something much worse, with disastrous consequences. And you can find Marxism and Engels, the teachings of Marx and Engels, and the teachings of positivists in the 19th century, were attempts to replace religion with a lifeless, dogmatic doctrine which forced mankind to believe in something without any spiritual content. But all these attempts have been unsuccessful. In 21st century, there is again an attempt to challenge religion that is mostly prompted by attempts in certain religious traditions to become highly radicalized and politicalized institutions and movements based on the fanatical interpretation, narrow dogmatic interpretation of the old religious dogmas. Now, in this context, you can see the relevance of the ideal of spiritual humanism, spiritual universal humanism, preached by Swami Vivekananda. It teaches, in the first place, it teaches us that we need not negate anything that is positive and good for mankind. Even in a God-denying agnostic philosophy, there should be something noble, worth emulating, which is useful for mankind if it teaches you compassion, love, and broad-mindedness. An example is often projected. Buddhism is projected highlighted as a grand example for a kind of universal humanism, which is not built upon the faith in a transcendental authority, in a creator God who creates his world and supervises mankind from above. Because Buddhism teaches us to be compassionate, to be broad-minded, and to lead a pure life, and to practice many values and virtues which are actually emphasized and stressed in all the great religious books, the holy books of the world. But mankind deviated from it. Now, a problem will always arise. A religious tradition which is purely humanistic, which doesn't have a metaphysical system to support it, which doesn't try to answer the question as to what is the meaning of human existence, what is the origin of the universe, what is the ultimate destiny of human life, why we should not do something wrong. To these questions, the humanists have no answer. But Vedanta gives an answer. Vedanta tells us that the reality is one. It is an impersonal, transcendental, immanent, omnipresent, all-pervading reality, supreme consciousness. It is called Atman or Brahman. It is the immanent reality residing in all human beings. And it's also the all-pervading reality. So, this consciousness is present in everybody. Now, built upon this metaphysical principle, Vedanta evolves a spiritual humanism, which is essentially universal. It is humanism, no doubt, but it is different from scientific humanism or the old Greek humanism, the Roman humanism, or socialist or communist humanism. Because all these attitudes have one serious drawback. They are somewhat lopsided. But Vedanta tells us that creation is one, humanity is one. You cannot injure even an insect or anything in this world without hurting yourself. Because we are all one spiritual entity. Its metaphysical and spiritual foundation is the non-dualistic philosophy of Shankaracharya, who lived in the 8th century. So Advaita. This Advaita is not a religion in a way. It is not a philosophical doctrine like humanist philosophy. It is not a religion like paganism or any of the organized religions. It is not an ideology like communism or socialism or positivism, philosophical doctrine. Rather, it is an outlook towards other living beings, and it is an attitude towards ourselves, because it's asked us to manifest this immanent reality within by actions, through our actions, our attitudes, our words, our whole human life. That's why Vivekananda, in his practical Vedanta lectures, repeatedly stressed this idea. This spiritual humanism, which is universal religion, becomes a very satisfying doctrine of universal ethics. Because normally ethics teaches you what you should not do and what you should do. And in religious traditions, the foundation for ethics or morality is fear of God, fear of hell. But in universal religion, in Vedanta, the metaphysical and spiritual foundation, the logical reason data for universal ethics is humanity or existence is one. So by hurting, by injuring, by doing something wrong to another living beings, we are hurting ourselves. It's not only living beings. You find in the Vedic mantras, there are some Om Prithvi Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Apashanti, Oshadaya Shanti, Vanaspadaya Shanti. Some mantras are there in the Rigveda Samhita, which is found in other Vedic tradition also. Let the earth, let the air, let water, let the mountains, forests, trees, plants, let all of them live in peace. One of the grandest, one of the most famous prayers in the Vedic literature is, let the earth, the ocean, the forests, the trees, the mountains, everything, let them all live in peace. Because if you violate the earth by cutting down trees, by constructing a dam, by blocking water, it may serve some purpose for some time. It can upset the not only ecological balance, it can upset human lives, human destiny, as what is happening today. If you read newspapers, or if you find more than 1,000 people have died in India. In fact, some of the most sacred and holiest shrines of Vedantic tradition, Vedic tradition, the Himalayas, Kedar, Badri, all these places, from where Ganga originates. These places have been highly affected by large-scale urbanization, construction of buildings, construction of dams, tunnels constructed under mountains and hills, spending millions and billions of dollars. What's the result? When the rains came, everything went, rivers overflooded, mountains fell down, thousands of people died. The holiest shrines many of them were destroyed. And this happens everywhere. Just give an example. So, the Vedantic text says, let not only human beings or the animal kingdom, let the whole earth, trees and mountains and valleys and hills and plants, let all of them live in peace, live in balance. This is called a kind of, is called in Vedantic tradition, is called rhythm, means a kind of balance, a kind of invisible, unifying coherence. You can find this interrelatedness of universal existence. If you cut down the trees, deforestation takes place, rainfall stops, and if there are rain, there will be floods, because trees won't be there to absorb the water and to stop the possibility of floods. So there is a balance, an invisible regulating principle behind the entire cosmic existence. So I was just trying to give an example to show that the Vedantic universalism The universal religion taught in Vedantic texts goes far beyond the realm of attitudes and behavior patterns. It goes far beyond that. In fact, it absorbs our entire existence. That's why the Vedic sages said, not only human beings, not only the animal kingdom, let the whole universe live in peace. If its balance is disturbed, then human life also will be affected. Now, in all religious traditions, you find 4 stages of evolution. In all religious traditions, you find. In fact, the problem is always this, that we interpret religions in terms of external rituals, and very often in terms of mythological stories, and sometimes in terms of philosophical doctrines. But these 3 stages, the realm of rituals, the realm of mythology, mythological stories, and the realm of philosophy, they are only primary stages. Every religion is different from every other religion if we interpret them in terms of rituals, conventions, and mythological stories. When you come to philosophy, there may be some common principles. Philosophical parallelisms can be found. But there again, in some minor details, there may be diversity, differences. Now, Vedanta tells you that these 3 stages are meant for the beginner in an ascending order. The rituals, the grossest, little more subtle mythological stories, and still more subtle philosophy. And religion begins and it ends in experience. That's a 4th stage. So ritual, mythology, philosophy, and experience. So when we reach that level of experience, then universal religion becomes a matter of our daily existence. Now, if you read the works, the teachings of the lives of the great mystics, saints and sages who lived in different religious traditions, who belong to different religious persuasions, traditions, and cultural traditions, you find, they all spoke the same thing, though they may have used different vocabularies, different languages, different terms. They all had the same experience of unity of existence. This is in fact, a person really becomes religious when he gets this experience or she gets the experience. Not that the other 3 levels are absolutely irrelevant. One has to go through these levels. But fanaticism or the deviation that I mentioned earlier from the universal teachings of spiritual traditions often takes place when we interpret religions in terms of rituals and conventions and mythological stories. But a religious seeker, a spiritual seeker who understands that his ultimate destination is experience, will realize that these are the 3 stages that he has to go through. And once we reach that stage, we not just believe, we experience. It becomes a matter of our daily experience that the reality is one. That reality is the all-pervading reality. We call Atman. Anybody can call whatever name he or she wants to call. But if anybody believes that God lives in a particular place, God will be happy if you read a particular book. He'll be terribly angry if you read a book belonging to another religious tradition, or if you respect another religious tradition, your God will be terribly angry. All these ideas are due to overemphasis on rituals and conventions. So once we understand the ultimate goal is experience, then this fanaticism, these radical views can be avoided. As you know, as we evolve, our understanding, our interpretation, our view of God also evolves. Very often, we conceive of a God who is very much like us. If we are broad-minded and compassionate, then we think of a God who is compassionate and broad-minded, who looks upon whole creation as His. But if we are narrow-minded, then we think of a God who is in very good terms with us, but who help us in crushing our enemies. We find some of the prayers when the Israelites were being led by Moses across the Sinai mountains. You find such ideas can be found in all religious traditions, which stress too much on conventions and traditions. I shall just give one example because it may be very appropriate for us to know how, as an example, to illustrate the point that such universal ideas, universalistic ideas exist in all religious traditions, but still we often deviate from those central spiritual teachings. Take Christianity, for example. Now, in Christianity, Christianity is as a vision of God who loves His creatures so greatly that He sacrificed Himself for their salvation. He sent His Son for His salvation. Now, salvation of the whole humanity. But then the insistence on certain conditions which were later additions by theologians. Take the universality or the universalism away from the fundamental teachings of these holy books. Again, another view. Humanity should follow the example of God as He incarnated, Jesus Christ. And the best way to become a Christian is to be like Christ. Not only the best, the only way for one to be a Christian is to be like Christ, be another Christ. Now, these ideas are found in Vedantic texts also, in the Upanishads, in the Vedas, everywhere. The Upanishad says, Sarvabhudeshu pasyed bhagavad bhavam atmanaha bhudani bhagavadi atmani esha bhagavadottamaha. This comes in the Bhagavata Purana, one of the devotional classics. But it is based on the mantra you find in the Ishavasya Upanishad. Yasmin sarvani bhudani atmanya. So you find here, the one who perceives, experiences the presence of the Lord in all beings, and the one who experiences the presence of the whole humanity in God, he is the greatest devotee. So he becomes another Christ. So these ideas are found in Vedantic texts, and you can find these ideas in biblical tradition also. But very often, dogmatism comes and takes away these fundamental teachings. As I said earlier, man-made structures. It is still happening in all religious traditions. Now, this universal religion has played a very important role, directly and indirectly, in evolving modern concepts in interfaith relationship. In fact, one of the greatest contribution of universal religion is that it paved the way for a more healthy and friendly understanding and interaction between various religious traditions in 21st century, and also of course in 20th century. So in the later half of 20th century, you can find the idea of universalism was accepted in all religious traditions. There have been, generally speaking, three attitudes in inter-religious relationship that we found in the later half of 19th century. The healthiest and the most spiritually conducive, the most unifying, the most rewarding attitude was the dialogical attitude. It is so called a dialogical attitude. It is built upon the principle that every religion has in it the essence of spiritual truth. In fact, this attitude has played a very important role in bridging gaps, building bridges between religious traditions in the later half of 20th century. It became popular, so well known, mostly after the Parliament of Religion in 1893, which saw the emergence of the great Swami Vivekananda, who was the prophet of this concept of universal religion. It helps us to accept, recognize, and respect and appreciate all good spiritual ideas found in other religious traditions. Extending further, it also teaches us to look upon all social and even political ideologies on the basis of their respective merit. So, according to many modern sociologists, the idea of universal religion becomes a tool in putting an end to ideological warfare. The idea of universal religion, or the universalism involved in the concept of universal religion, can become a tool for building bridges even in ideological warfare, because it is built upon this simple principle that in every religious tradition there is some great spiritual truths which are acceptable, which are relevant, which are important for the whole humanity, not necessarily for the people who profess that particular religion alone, but whole humanity. This attitude is a direct fruit, the byproduct of Vivekananda's exposition of universal religion. And you find even the Vatican has a desk for interfaith dialogues, ecumenism, and so on. Indirectly, it was the concept of universal religion which paved the way for the emergence of the very concept of interreligious dialogues or interfaith dialogues. To understand and appreciate the real importance of this particular contribution, we have to give an outline of the other two attitudes which were prevalent among the followers of different religious traditions before this universal religion became well accepted among the intellectuals. And in 20th century, great historians, scientists and sociologists like Toynbee, Belur Math, and even a great agnostic philosopher like Bertrand Russell, who wrote a book, Why I'm Not a Christian. Just imagine, because he was so much opposed. He couldn't see the universal spiritual ideas behind the great teachings of the early fathers, Christian fathers. Anyhow, even an agnostic philosopher like Bertrand Russell, a historian like Toynbee, Belur Math, philosopher, or good sociologist and scientists like Huxley, Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley, and several others, who are not conventional believers in religious doctrines, came to appreciate and understand the greatness of universal religious spiritual humanism. Maybe a far greater and much more relevant example is Jung himself. Jung was a psychologist who broke out from Freud and gave up his psychoanalysis theory and all. He himself accepted the creative and the constructive role of true spiritual humanism, which should be the essence of all religions, according to him. Modern Man in Search of a Soul, several such works you can find. Now, the other two attitudes should be kept in mind to understand and appreciate the relevance of universal religion. The second attitude is this kind of defensive or exclusivistic attitude, which was prevalent throughout 19th century till about 1870s, 1870s, 1880s. According to the theologians and thinkers who professed this exclusivistic or defensive attitude, all other religions than their own religion are inferior. So a kind of patronizing attitude. They believe that their own religion is the right religion. All other religions are inferior or unacceptable. Some of them went still further. They interpreted other religions other than their own as devils, Satan's place, Satan's tricks. That attitude is now practically non-existent. It has vanished. At least no civilized, educated, cultured person will dare to speak of such things in a modern audience. To that extent, humanity has progressed from those primitive attitudes. Another attitude that was prevalent, that was prevalent in the 1970s and 60s, even in this country, that is a kind of syncretistic attitude, surrendering one's own traditions, one's own values completely in favor of another alien tradition. So the arrival of a number of teachers and many Western intellectuals completely gave up their own Christian mystical spiritual tradition, Judo-Christian, the Greco-Roman tradition, and surrendered themselves, fully accepting whatever came from the East. That attitude also is equally unhealthy. So the exclusivistic attitude of the early theologians and this syncretistic attitude of these anti-establishment movements that we witnessed in the 70s and 60s, 70s and 80s of last century, both are equally unhealthy. So the correct and real attitude, the healthiest approach towards interreligious relationship is the attitude that I mentioned earlier. It's called dialogical approach, which is built upon the concept of universal religion. Because it tells us that if God is one, then that God, and if that God is compassionate and merciful, He cannot give wrong religion to one group of people and right religion to another group of people and make them fight among themselves. How do you reconcile between the concept of an all-merciful, compassionate God, this incompatibility, and a cruel world, a quarrelsome humanity? If God is so compassionate, why should there be so much of misery in this world? So that why should there be so many religions, so many traditions, and why should there be quarrel among them? So this dialogical approach teaches us to accept and respect and appreciate good spiritual universal ideas found in all religious traditions, no matter in which country or in which culture it had its origin. If God is merciful and if He is one, then humanity is equally His inheritor as a whole. So this is the great contribution of Swami Vivekananda's concept of universal religion. And maybe in the coming decades, we are going to witness more and more different manifestations of the relevance and importance of this doctrine of universal religion. Thank you. Namaskar.